Roy Williams is a marketing man. His clients want to buy whatever advertising sells the most product.
It's Rick Dees in the morning. All communication should be poetic. Bring him in, please. Roy Williams!
Essential to any company is the ability to get your message out. My guest says, don't give up hope. Joining me now is Roy Williams.
Yes, so how do you speak in poetry to people and get them to do things you want them to do?
Here to talk about the advantages of radio advertising is the author of a new book called The Wizard of Ads.
Joining me is Roy Williams. Today we're talking about his book, Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads. This is one of the most important books that anybody can read.
What makes people do the things they do? More importantly, how can we get people to do what we want them to do? With another part of the answer to that question, here's the Wizard of Ads, Roy H. Williams.
Our first session is the side door into the mind. Now, you'll understand in just a little bit what I mean when I say the side door into the mind, but the question we're trying to resolve in advertising is this: how can we get people to do what we want them to do? Now, contrary to popular belief, the human creature thinks in neither words nor visual images. We don't think in pictures. We think in a series of mental images. And oddly enough, mental images are the universal language of all humankind. Everyone thinks in the same language. No matter where you were born, no matter what nationality, everyone thinks in the same language. We simply attach different words to these mental images. Now, if a mental image is not a visual image, if it's not a picture, then what is it? A mental image is a composite of sight, sound, texture, color, smell, taste, opinion, and mood. When I say I have the blues, you have a mental image of exactly what I'm talking about. You can feel it yourself. It's a mild depression. It's sort of a blah, unmotivated feeling. Now, a Japanese person who has precisely that same feeling and wants to describe it will use the word jutsu. A German will call it niedergeschlagen. An Italian calls it scoraggiato. A Jewish person may call it madukduk. Now, they're all describing precisely the same mental image. Now, a mental image can contain elements of visual things, but it doesn't have to. Now, if we think in mental images, and the goal of advertising is to sequence and control a progression of mental images. Let's look at the brain for a minute, because this is where it all happens. Your eyes are connected to a place just above your spine at the back of your skull. The optic nerve leaves from the eyes right to the back of your head to the visual cortex. Now, visual memory is stored in a place called the visual association area, just above that at the back of your skull. Notice, the very furthest thing from the eyes is where the information is stored. Does the location of different parts of the brain have any direct bearing on the function of that part of the brain? Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, you'll see very, very, very soon how critical physical proximity is of the different segments of the brain. Now, just above that, back here, is the processing of multisensorial information in what's called the sensory association area. If you see something, you feel, like, so you see leaves blowing in the wind, and you feel the wind on your skin, and you can hear the wind howling, and you're experiencing the wind in several different ways. And maybe you smell smoke blowing on the wind, and you know there's a fire off in that direction. And all of these things bringing you information about the wind through different senses are sorted and collated and all kind of packaged into one thing so that they relate together right back there at the back of your skull. Now, next to that is what's called the primary somatosensory cortex. This is where tactile information comes into the mind. Pain, pressure, position, movement, and temperature. Next to that is the initiation of voluntary movement. If you decide to move an arm or a leg, it's that little red stripe right there that triggers the movement. Now, those movements are coordinated here by the motor association cortex, right along the sides of your head, just in front of your ears, but behind your forehead. Now, the motor association cortex is something like Commander Riker on the Starship Enterprise, because it's the prefrontal cortex, right behind your forehead here, that is the seat of planning, emotion, and judgment. Aha, Captain Jean-Luc Picard. You see, the prefrontal cortex says, we're going to the gamma quadrant. Then it turns to the motor association cortex next to it and says, make it so number one. Then the motor association cortex has to make sure that all of the actions are coordinated, that the arms and the legs and the head and the eyes and everything is moving in sequence. Call this the dancing part of your brain, the motor association cortex. The prefrontal cortex, right behind your forehead, the center of planning, emotion, and judgment, decides what's going to happen, makes the decisions. Now bear with me. Until you have successfully influenced the prefrontal cortex, you've done nothing. Nothing. You must reach right behind the forehead, the prefrontal cortex. Planning, emotion, and judgment all come from here. Everything else is a little bit supportive of the process. Now notice on the map, the motor association cortex, Commander Riker, shields the prefrontal cortex from the rest of the areas of the brain. Now, every other part of the brain has to go across the motor association cortex to get to Captain Jean-Luc Picard, the prefrontal cortex. Now, let's look at the ear. The ear is connected to that little brown spot known as the auditory cortex. Oh, isn't that cute? This is where sound comes into the mind, this little brown spot here on the map. What's interesting, though, just as the visual cortex was bordered by the visual association area, where the memory of sight was stored, right there in that huge blue part of the brain is where the memory of sound is stored. The auditory association area is where sound is stored, and it touches more of the other sections of the brain than any other. It touches directly everything except the prefrontal cortex. Now wait a minute. If all of those parts of the brain were the tail feathers of a peacock, then the auditory association area would be the body of the peacock, right there at the bottom, touching everything else directly. Huh. Now, at the back of the auditory association area, you see that very bright lime green spot. That's known as Wernicke's area. Remember what I said about the physical proximity of the different parts of the brain having a direct relationship with what that part does. Wernicke's area of the brain is where nouns come from. Nouns. Object naming. A noun is what? The name of a person, place, or thing. When you attach a word to a visual memory, the visual memory is stored here in the visual association area. When you attach a word to name that object, it comes from Wernicke's area of the brain. Now, if the memory of the word in the auditory association area, here, comes up against the memory of the vision, the memory of the sight, and you attach the word to that memory. A four-legged African animal with irregular brown spots and an extremely long neck. And Wernicke, in your mind, is attaching the word giraffe. There is no background to the picture until I say jungle, or desert, or prairie, or zoo, and then there's something behind the giraffe. But until I said those other words, all you saw was a giraffe with no background, correct? Words control what you see in your mind. Huh. Funny. Now, what happens when you're imagining something and you're imagining it in wordless thought? We'll get there in a minute. Stay with me. On the other end of the auditory association area, where the memory of words meets the action part of the brain, we have Broca's area of the brain, the key to everything. Everything. Broca's area of the brain is attached directly to the little brown spot, the auditory cortex. It's got the main juice, it's on the main line, it's got the 220 voltage, directly connected to the ear, and Broca's area is where verbs come from. When you describe an action, now wait a minute, it's right there bordered on 270 degrees of its perimeter by the motor association cortex, the part of the brain that coordinates physical action. 270 degrees of its perimeter are touching the action part of the brain. And that's where action words come from. In Wernicke's area, at the back, where the auditory association area, the memory of words met the memory of sight, you had nouns. Where the memory of words meets the memory of actions, you create verbs. That's where you speak a verb. You describe the action you're trying to communicate. But wait a minute, Broca's area also does something else. It anticipates what another person's going to say, which is why when a person says what you thought they were going to say, you're bored. Your mind wanders. You quit listening. Broca hates predictability. Broca can't stand it when somebody does exactly what you knew they were going to do. When you're listening to someone tell a joke and the joke isn't funny because you saw the punchline coming, you saw where this joke was headed, you knew what the punchline was going to be, you don't laugh, right? That's Broca's area. Broca goes, boy, I see this one coming a mile away. And he just can't wait till it's over. You know, people are like that about ads sometimes. The advertiser's going, wah, wah, wah. And the listener's going, I can't wait till this is over. You know, yeah, your store hours, yeah, your street address, yeah. Fair, fast, friendly, yeah, you bet. Here's 35 cents, call someone that cares. Broca's area is what drives you nuts when you hear a dripping faucet late at night. Drip, 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 drip. You see, it's the predictability of that drip that makes Broca just go, I've got to make that go away. It's also Broca, however, that causes you to stand and tap your foot and wiggle your hips and do like this behind the wheel of your car at the intersection when you're listening to your favorite song, because Broca, when he is surprised, takes delight. Surprising Broca is the key to successful advertising. To say something other than what the listener thought you were going to say, or to say it differently than they thought you were going to say it. In music, listen to a hit song, any hit song, I promise you, either in the melody or in the rhythm or in the lyrics, they are surprising Broca. They're doing something other than what Broca's area of the brain had anticipated. When you hear a song that seems trite and repetitive and redundant and just absolutely tedious, it's because it's predictable. Now, I want to ask you something. We're trying to get to the prefrontal cortex, right behind the forehead, the seat of planning, emotion, and judgment. What is the furthest part of the brain from the prefrontal cortex? Vision. Vision. Now, wait a minute. What is the closest part on this map of the brain to the prefrontal cortex if we must cross the motor association cortex? It's Broca's area, right? Broca's area anticipates the predictable, it generates action words, and it describes actions. Now, you are awakened by the smell of breakfast. Slipping on your clothes, you step out onto the deck of the ship just as the sun rises over the ocean. You never knew the sky could hold so many colors, or that breakfast could taste so good, or that you could feel so alive. Sailing with all your friends to a place you've never been. You're having the time of your lives. You're glad you called that number. What was it again? Oh, yes, 1-800-BLUE-SKY. You'll never be able to look at a blue sky again without remembering this trip and smiling. Unfortunately, there's no such company. I bet you kind of wish there was, though, don't you? 1-800-BLUE-SKY. Now, we planted a recall cue, which we'll tell you more about later, and we took you to a place you've never been. You went there in your mind. That is a 30-second ad that I can assure you, were there a company called 1-800-BLUE-SKY, would get a lot of calls from people saying, yeah, I want to go on that trip. And here's what I want for breakfast. And make sure I'm awake when the sun rises over the ocean. Because nobody does anything that they have not first imagined in their mind. The goal of advertising is to get the customer to imagine doing the thing you want them to do. Now, what are the keys? The customer must see himself watching the sunrise, sailing with friends, calling that number. It all happens in the brain. Let's go. The visual association area is that part of the brain where visual memory is stored. It's located at the back of your skull, just above your spine. The area of the brain surrounding your ear, the auditory association area, is where words, music, and sounds are stored. The prefrontal cortex, just behind your forehead, is the seat of planning, emotion, and judgment. The prefrontal cortex is what must be reached if we have any hope of getting the customer to say yes. Now, mental imagery, imagining something in your mind, imagining the sun rising over the ocean, that would happen in a computer in RAM. Active, currently going on right now. These other things we've been describing are like the hard drive. It's long-term storage that can be recalled at a later date. But RAM, what you're consciously, currently, actively thinking, happens in what's known as working memory. Working memory has three parts. The first of those is the visuospatial sketchpad. The visuospatial sketchpad is that movie screen in your brain where you see visual things. You can imagine the sun rising over the ocean on the visuospatial sketchpad. Now, the articulatory loop, or the phonological loop, or what I call echoic memory, is another function of working memory, and the central executive is the third function of working memory. That's the part that makes the decision to decide what to do right now, what action to take. Now, where this really gets fascinating is that common sense would tell us that the visuospatial sketchpad would be at the back of the skull, part of the visual association area. Common sense would also tell us the articulatory loop would be part of the auditory association area around the ear. Common sense would likewise tell us that the central executive would be found in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning, emotion, and judgment right behind the forehead. But common sense would be wrong. All three of those are located in what's called the dorsolateral prefrontal association area. Everybody say dorsolateral. Prefrontal association area. Now, where do you think that is? Well, the dorsolateral prefrontal association area is a bridge that crosses the motor association cortex, the action part of the brain. When you see something in your mind on your visuospatial sketchpad, you're seeing it in a part of your brain connected not to your eyes, but to your ears. The part of the brain you're using is connected directly to the auditory cortex through Broca's area, and it crosses the motor association cortex, the action part of the brain, and touches the prefrontal cortex. The DLPFC, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, is connected to the ear, and that's where you see things in your mind, even when you're imagining things wordlessly, even when you're imagining visual things. This section was called the side door into the brain for one reason. The ear is the key to influencing the human creature. Words, when spoken well or artfully written, cause your customer to see things in his mind. Now, this is why your choice of words is singularly vital to the success of your ads. It's your choice of words. Other decisions such as font, colors, illustrations, and style in an ad, I'm not saying they're unimportant. I'm saying they are merely supportive. You can have the most classy, elegant, beautiful, well-illustrated ads in the world, but if they don't say something that matters to your customer, the ad isn't going to work, no matter how artfully executed. Yes, it's the words that count, even when you advertise in print. Now, here's something really fascinating. When you are reading silently, the words on the page have no meaning. The printed word has no meaning to the human creature until the printed word has been translated into the spoken word in the mind. Until you hear the word in your mind, it has no meaning. Which is why when you're laying in bed so often, reading, and you come to the realization that you're half asleep and you've been scanning the same paragraph for 20 minutes, and you have absolutely no idea what it says. It's because your eyes are doing their job. They're seeing the words, but the words are not being translated into the sound of those words in your mind. That part of your brain is already asleep, and your eyes are still doing their job. Now, remember this. The written language was created only to represent the spoken language. Even when you're advertising in print, you must think of how these words sound together. The sound of the sentence, the sound of the words. You very often will choose the word to use based upon how it sounds. Have you ever noticed how the word mediocre simply means average? But anytime you hear the word mediocre, it communicates disappointment, does it not? Now, technically, mediocre simply means average. But it doesn't mean that here, does it? Mediocre is a bad word. The sound of the word, the associations that we have to that word, are just as important as the technical, accurate definition of the word. Words are the most powerful force there has ever been. The neurologists have known it for 125 years. Wernicke discovered and named Wernicke's area of the brain where nouns are generated in 1868 during the Civil War. Broca, 1874, over a century and a quarter ago. I think it's time that advertising professionals learn about these parts of the brain, what they do, and how to influence them to get our customer to do what we want him to do. And that's all for this session.